The story opens immediately with life-or-death stakes. Aaliyah is crouched in the back seat of a stranger's luxury sedan, her breath fogging the leather as her abusive ex-boyfriend Marcus prowls outside the window in his heavy leather jacket, fists clenched. The narrator poses the hook. If the thought of escaping one predator only to trap yourself with a far more dangerous one sends chills down your spine, you're going to want to stay for this. The intro establishes Aaliyah's desperate circumstances. She's been living in a cycle of terror, her apartment covered in hidden bruises and broken promises, stalked by a man who swore she'd never leave him alive, before the inciting incident where she makes a split-second decision to dive into the back seat of an idling sedan that happens to belong to Jin Young, the ruthless head of a Korean crime syndicate. The glass separating her from Marcus feels impossibly thin. But when the stranger in the driver's seat, a man in an immaculate dark suit with eyes like frozen steel, slowly turns to look at her, Aaliyah realizes she may have traded one monster for something far worse. Until he does the last thing she expects. He locks the doors, leans forward with lethal calm, and whispers just loud enough for her to hear. Quiet, or you die. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you. The engine roared to life before Aaliyah could process what was happening. Jin Young's hands moved with mechanical precision. Shift into gear, check mirrors, pull into traffic. All while Marcus's fist hammered against the window one final time. The sound echoed in the leather-lined cabin like a death knell. Then they were moving, gliding through the city streets as if violence hadn't just been one pane of glass away. Aaliyah couldn't stop shaking. Sit up, Jin Young said. His voice was flat, emotionless. Not cruel, but not kind either. Just a command expecting obedience. She forced herself upright, her hands still pressed against the door panel, as if she could feel Marcus's rage vibrating through the metal. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow. Jin Young drove like someone who'd done this 1,000 times, calm, deliberate, always 3 steps ahead. Who is he? Jin Young asked, his eyes never leaving the road. Aaliyah's voice cracked. She swallowed hard. My ex-boyfriend. Wrong answer. Jin Young took a sharp turn, and Aaliyah grabbed the seat to steady herself. Men like that don't become exes. They become corpses, or they become problems. Which one is he? The cold pragmatism in his tone made her chest tighten. A problem. How long? 2 years. Jin Young's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and for the first time, his gaze lingered. Not on her face. On her wrists. On the dark smudge of a bruise peeking out from beneath her sleeve. On the way she held herself, compact, defensive, like prey that had learned to make itself small. You're not a spy, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Aaliyah blinked. What? A spy would have better survival instincts. You would have run to the police. Filed a restraining order. Done something other than hide in a stranger's car. He turned onto a highway, the city's skyline rising ahead like jagged teeth. Which means you're either very desperate or very stupid.
I'm desperate, Aaliyah whispered.
Jin Young nodded, as if this confirmed something. The police won't help you. Men like him don't stop because of a piece of paper. They stop when they're afraid. Or when they're dead. Aaliyah's stomach twisted. Are you going to kill him? I haven't decided yet. Jin Young's tone was casual, like he was discussing the weather. First, I need to know why you're more useful to me alive than dead. The words hit her like ice water. Useful. That's all she was. A variable in whatever cold calculation was running behind those sharp eyes. Jin Young pulled into an underground parking garage, the kind reserved for residents who paid more in monthly fees than most people earned in a year. The car descended into darkness, fluorescent lights flickering past until they reached the lowest level. He parked in a spot marked with a simple placard, reserved, penthouse.
Get out, he said.
Aaliyah's hands trembled as she reached for the door handle. When she stepped onto the concrete, her knees nearly buckled. Jin Young was already moving toward a private elevator, his stride confident and unhurried. He swiped a keycard, and the doors opened with a soft chime. "Are you coming, or would you prefer to wait here for him to find you?" Jin Young asked, holding the elevator door open with one hand. Aaliyah stumbled forward. The ride up was silent. Jin Young stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at his own reflection in the polished steel doors. Aaliyah watched the numbers climb, 30, 40, 50, until they reached the top floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a penthouse that looked like it had been carved from glass and shadow. Everything was sharp angles and cold surfaces. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, making Aaliyah feel like she was suspended in the sky. The furniture was minimalist. Black leather, chrome accents, not a single photograph or personal touch. It was the kind of space that didn't invite warmth. It demanded control. "You'll stay here," Jin Young said, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over a chair. Underneath, his white shirt was crisp and unwrinkled, despite everything. "There's a guest room down the hall. Don't touch anything you don't need." Aaliyah nodded numbly. Her mind was still catching up, still trying to reconcile the fact that she was standing in a stranger's penthouse because she'd been too terrified to think of a better plan. "I need to leave," she said suddenly. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I thank you for helping me, but I can't stay here. I need to go home. I need to get my things." "Your things are ash by now." Jin Young walked to a tablet mounted on the wall and tapped the screen. A grid of security camera feeds flickered to life. He swiped through them until he found the one he wanted, then turned the screen toward her. Aaliyah's breath caught. It was her apartment building. The camera showed the front entrance, the narrow stairwell leading to her basement unit. And there, sitting on the steps with a gun resting casually against his thigh, was Marcus. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting, like a wolf that knew the rabbit would eventually have to come home. "He's been there for the last hour," Jin Young said. "He'll be there tomorrow. And the day after. Men like him don't give up. They wait. They plan. They execute." Aaliyah's vision blurred. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to scream or cry or both. "The police can't stop a man like that," Jin Young continued, his voice devoid of sympathy. "A restraining order is just paper. He'll burn it along with everything else you own. But here..." He gestured to the windows, the locked elevator, the fortress he'd built around himself. "Here, you're untouchable." "Why?" Aaliyah whispered. "Why would you help me?" Jin Young's expression didn't change. "I haven't decided if I am helping you yet. But you're safer here than anywhere else. For now." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in months. 3 days passed in a haze. Aaliyah barely left the guest room. She slept in fits and starts, waking every few hours convinced she'd hear Marcus's voice, his fists pounding on the door. But the penthouse remained silent except for the hum of the city far below. On the 4th night, Jin Young knocked on her door. "Dinner," he said simply. Aaliyah followed him to the dining room, where a table had been set with 2 places. The food looked expensive, cuts of steak, roasted vegetables, wine in crystal glasses, but Aaliyah couldn't imagine eating any of it. Her stomach was a knot of anxiety. Jin Young sat, precise and controlled, and gestured for her to do the same. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "My men have been looking into your ex-boyfriend," Jin Young said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Marcus Holloway. Age 32. Works sporadically in construction. Gambles. Drinks. Beats women." He said it like he was reading a grocery list. "He also has ties to a gang called the Vipers." Aaliyah's breath hitched. the vipers. Street-level criminals. Drugs, extortion, the occasional murder. Jin-young took a bite, chewed, swallowed. They're not sophisticated, but they're persistent. Which makes your ex-boyfriend more than just a domestic problem. He's a liability. Aaliyah stared at her plate. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. Men like him don't advertise their affiliations to the women they control. Jin-young reached for his wine glass, and Aaliyah flinched. Just a fraction, just enough to make her ashamed, but he noticed. He froze, the glass halfway to his lips. His eyes narrowed, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't bothered to solve until now. How many times did he hit you? Jin-young asked quietly. I didn't count. How many times did you think about leaving? Every day. And yet you stayed. Aaliyah's throat tightened. I didn't have anywhere to go. Jin-young set the glass down without drinking. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Not gentle, but no longer cold. No one touches what is mine, he said. The words hung in the air like a vow. And as long as you're under this roof, you are mine. Do you understand? Aaliyah didn't trust herself to speak, so she nodded. Jin-young stood and walked to her side of the table. Aaliyah tensed, her body screaming at her to run, but he only placed a hand on the back of her chair.
Eat, he said.
You're no use to me if you starve. The next morning, Jin-young appeared in the guest room doorway holding a garment bag. He didn't knock. He didn't ask permission. He simply walked in and draped the bag across the bed. Your clothes are ruined, he said, nodding toward the torn blue blouse she'd been wearing the night she fled. It sat folded on the dresser, a relic of her old life. Wear this instead. Aaliyah unzipped the bag slowly, half expecting something revealing or humiliating. Instead, she found a silk blouse in deep emerald green and tailored black pants that looked like they cost more than her monthly rent. I can't accept this, she said. You already have. Jin-young leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. Looking weak makes you a target. Looking powerful makes people think twice. If you're going to survive this, you need to dress like armor. Aaliyah ran her fingers over the silk. It was impossibly soft, nothing like the cheap fabric she was used to. I don't know how to be powerful. Then learn. Jin-young's tone was sharp, but there was something underneath it, something almost resembling patience. Power isn't about what you feel. It's about what others see. When you walk into a room, they should see someone who belongs, not someone who's waiting for permission to exist. Aaliyah looked up at him, her throat tight. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Like she was capable of more than surviving. Like she was capable of anything at all. Start with how you dress, Jin-young continued. Then how you stand. Then how you speak. One layer at a time. Until the armor becomes you. He left without another word, and Aaliyah was alone with the silk and the strange, fragile seed of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Days blurred into a week. Aaliyah wandered the penthouse when Jin-young was gone, which was often. He left early and returned late, always in that same immaculate suit, always with that same unreadable expression. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum, beautiful, expensive, and utterly lifeless. One afternoon, while Jin-young was out, Aaliyah found herself in his study. She told herself she was just looking, just trying to understand the man who'd pulled her from the fire. But when she opened the bottom drawer of his desk, she found something that made her blood run cold. A manila folder. Her name printed on the tab in neat block letters. Aaliyah's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, her apartment building, her walking to the corner store, her sitting on the steps with a coffee. Reports detailing her routines, her work schedule, even Marcus's comings and goings. The dates went back weeks. Long before she'd ever jumped into that car. He'd been watching her. The sound of the elevator chiming made her jump. She shoved the folder back into the drawer and hurried out of the study, her heart hammering. By the time Jin Young appeared in the living room, she was standing by the windows, pretending to admire the view. "You've been in my study," he said. "Not a question. A fact." Aaliyah turned slowly. "How did you know?" "The drawer wasn't closed all the way. You're not as careful as you think." Jin Young set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. "What did you find?" "You were watching me." The accusation came out sharper than she intended. "Before I got in your car. You knew where I lived. You knew about Marcus. You." "I was watching Marcus," Jin Young interrupted. He poured himself a drink from the bar, whiskey over ice. "You were collateral observation." "Why?" "Because Marcus Holloway stole something from me. A ledger detailing transactions, shipments, accounts. Very sensitive information. And he hid it somewhere I couldn't find." Jin Young took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "Until I realized he'd been using your apartment." Aaliyah felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What?" "The vents. He hid the ledger in your air vents. That's why I was in your neighborhood that night. I was preparing to retrieve it when you made your dramatic entrance into my car." Jin Young's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. Fate has a sense of irony. "So this whole time," Aaliyah's voice cracked, "you weren't protecting me. You were using me." "I was doing both." Jin Young set his glass down and walked toward her, slow and deliberate. "Yes, you're useful. Yes, I need access to that ledger. But I also meant what I said at dinner. No one touches what is mine. And whether you believe it or not, that includes you." Aaliyah wanted to scream, to run, to do anything other than stand there feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under her. But Jin Young was already turning away, pulling his phone from his pocket. "My men will retrieve the ledger tonight," he said. "And then Marcus Holloway will learn what it costs to steal from me." "What are you going to do to him?" Aaliyah whispered. Jin Young glanced back at her, and for the first time, she saw something cold and absolute in his eyes. Something that reminded her why people feared the dragon. "Whatever is necessary," he said. The sound of shattering glass woke Aaliyah at 3 a.m. She bolted upright, her heart immediately jackhammering against her ribs. For a split second, she was back in the basement apartment, listening to Marcus kick down the door. But then she remembered. She was in the penthouse. She was safe. Until the second crash echoed through the hallway. Aaliyah grabbed her phone, fingers fumbling for the emergency contact Jin Young had programmed into it. But before she could dial, she heard something else, the sickening thud of flesh hitting flesh, a grunt of pain, and then Jin Young's voice, cold, controlled, lethal. Wrong choice. She should have stayed in the room, locked the door, hidden like she'd always done. But something had shifted in her over the past weeks, something small and sharp like a shard of broken glass working its way to the surface. She grabbed the lamp from the nightstand, a ridiculous weapon, but it was heavy, and crept into the hallway. The living room looked like a war zone. One of the floor-to-ceiling windows had a spiderweb crack spreading across it. Furniture was overturned. And in the center of it all, Jin Young had a man pinned to the floor, one knee on his spine, twisting his arm at an angle that made Aaliyah's stomach turn. "Who sent you?" Jin Young's voice was calm, almost conversational, as if he were asking about the weather. The man spat blood onto the marble. "Fuck you." Jin Young twisted harder. The crack was audible. The man screamed. Wrong answer. Jin Young's free hand moved to the man's throat, fingers pressing against the carotid artery with surgical precision. "You have approximately 15 seconds before you lose consciousness. Then I'll wake you up, and we'll start again. Or you can tell me what I want to know." "Holloway," the man gasped. "Marcus Holloway sent me." Jin Young's expression didn't change, But Aaliyah saw his grip tighten fractionally. To do what? The girl. He wants the girl. He can't have her. He said. The man choked, struggling for air. He said to tell you she doesn't belong to you. She's his. Jin Young leaned down, his mouth inches from the assassin's ear. Then he shouldn't have let her go. What happened next was brutal and efficient. Jin Young released the man's throat only to drive his fist into the base of his skull. The assassin went limp, unconscious before he hit the floor. Jin Young stood, rolled his shoulders like he'd just finished a light workout, and reached for his phone. That's when Aaliyah saw the blood. It was dripping from Jin Young's left hand, a deep gash across his palm where the broken window must have caught him. He didn't seem to notice. He was already making a call, his voice clipped and professional as he arranged for someone to clean up the mess. You're bleeding, Aaliyah said. Her voice sounded strange, distant. Jin Young glanced at his hand like it belonged to someone else. It's nothing. It's not nothing. She set the lamp down and walked toward him, her legs steadier than they should have been. You need to bandage it before you get blood everywhere. For a moment, Jin Young just stared at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he nodded once. Bathroom. First aid kit under the sink. Aaliyah led him to the guest bathroom, flipping on the harsh fluorescent light. Jin Young sat on the edge of the tub without being asked, holding his injured hand palm up like an offering. The cut was deeper than she'd thought, angry and red, still oozing. She found the first aid kit and knelt between his knees, her hands surprisingly steady as she cleaned the wound with antiseptic. Jin Young didn't flinch. He didn't make a sound. He just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. You should have stayed in your room, he said quietly. Probably. Aaliyah pressed gauze against the cut, applying pressure. But I didn't. Why? She looked up at him. Because I'm tired of hiding. Something flickered in Jin Young's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He reached up with his uninjured hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Aaliyah's breath caught. You're braver than you think, he murmured. Or stupider. She tried to smile, but it came out shaky. You said those were the only two options. I was wrong. Jin Young's thumb traced the line of her jaw. There's a third option. Desperation that turns into something else. Something dangerous. Aaliyah finished wrapping the bandage, her fingers lingering on his wrist. The air between them felt charged, electric. Is that what I am now? Dangerous? Becoming. Jin Young stood, pulling her up with him. They were close now. So close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with blood and adrenaline. But you're not there yet. Then teach me, Aaliyah whispered. Jin Young's eyes darkened. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he stepped back, creating distance like a physical barrier. Get some sleep. Tomorrow night, you're coming with me. Where? Somewhere public. Somewhere Marcus will see you. His voice had returned to its usual coldness, but something had changed. Something irreversible. And when he does, I want him to know exactly who you belong to now. The auction house was the kind of place Aaliyah had only seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers dripped from vaulted ceilings. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than cars moved through the space like schools of exotic fish. Everything gleamed, the marble floors, the gold fixtures, the jewels at every throat. Aaliyah felt like an imposter. The dress Jin Young had chosen for her was stunning, black silk that flowed like water, with long sleeves and a high neckline that covered every bruise, every scar, every mark Marcus had left on her skin. It was armor, just like he'd promised. But standing here, surrounded by people who belonged in this world, she felt like a fraud playing dress-up. Stop fidgeting. Jin Young's hand settled at the small of her back, warm and possessive. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, every inch the powerful man he was. You look like you're waiting for someone to call security. I feel like I don't belong here. Good. He guided her through the crowd with the confidence of someone who owned the room. That means you're paying attention. The moment you feel like you belong is the moment you've let your guard down. They moved through the auction hall, Jin-young nodding to people Aaliyah didn't recognize. Business associates, she assumed. Criminals hiding behind expensive suits and polite smiles. She was so focused on not tripping over her own feet that she almost missed him. Marcus. He was standing near the back of the room, half hidden behind a marble column. He'd cleaned up, traded his leather jacket for a poorly fitting blazer, but there was no mistaking those eyes. The same eyes that had watched her sleep, that had narrowed before his fist flew, that had promised she'd never escape. Aaliyah's entire body went rigid. Jin-young felt it instantly. Where?
10 o'clock.
Behind the column. Jin-young didn't turn to look. He didn't need to. Instead, he did something Aaliyah didn't expect. He pulled her closer, his hand sliding from her back to her waist, and tilted her chin up with his other hand. What are you? He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was a brand, a claim, a declaration of war wrapped in the guise of intimacy. Aaliyah's mind blanked, her hands instinctively gripping the lapels of his tuxedo. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were blazing. Now he knows, Jin-young murmured against her lips. Now everyone knows. Aaliyah's heart was racing for entirely different reasons now. That was necessary. But the way his thumb brushed across her bottom lip suggested it might have been more than that. The auction began moments later. Aaliyah tried to focus on the auctioneer's voice, the paddle numbers being raised, the artwork being displayed. But she could feel Marcus's eyes on her like a physical weight. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself small again. But Jin-young's hand never left her waist, anchoring her, reminding her she wasn't alone. The chaos started during the final lot. The lights went out first, all of them, plunging the auction house into complete darkness. Screams erupted. People stumbled and shoved. Aaliyah felt Jin-young's grip tighten, pulling her close, but then something hard cracked against the back of her skull. The world tilted sideways. When she came to, she was being dragged through a service exit. Strong hands yanked her forward, her heels scraping against concrete. The night air hit her face like a slap, and she realized with cold horror that she was outside. Alone. With Marcus. Did you really think that suit could protect you? Marcus hissed, shoving her into the back of a van. Did you think you could just walk away? Aaliyah's head throbbed. She tasted copper. Marcus, please. Shut up. He climbed in after her, slamming the doors. The van lurched forward, tires squealing. You made me look like a fool. Running to him. Letting him put his hands on you. Letting him kiss you like some kind of whore. I'm not. His hand cracked across her face. The old, familiar pain. I said shut up. They drove for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. When the van finally stopped, Marcus hauled her out into an abandoned shipyard. Rustic containers loomed in the darkness like sleeping giants. The smell of salt and decay hung heavy in the air. Marcus dragged her to an empty hangar and threw her against a support beam. She hit hard. The air knocked from her lungs. By the time she could breathe again, he had a zip tie around her wrists, securing her to the metal structure. You know what's funny? Marcus crouched in front of her, his face inches from hers. I never loved you, not even at the start. You were always just convenient, a place to crash, someone to take my anger out on. But then you became useful in other ways. Aaliyah's vision was still blurry from the blow to her head. What are you talking about? The ledger I stole from your boyfriend's organization. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. It's encrypted. Needs a 64-digit alphanumeric code to access. I hid it in your apartment, sure. But I also spent months training you to memorize that code without even knowing it. Horror crept up Aaliyah's spine. What? Every night, I'd recite it while you were falling asleep. Over and over. Whispering it like a lullaby. The human brain is remarkable, Aaliyah. It remembers patterns even when we're not conscious of them. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. So, you're going to give me that code. And then I'm going to disappear with enough money to retire. And you? You can go back to your crime lord and be his little pet. I don't know any code, Aaliyah said desperately. Marcus's smile was cruel. Yes, you do. You just don't know that you know. But don't worry. We have all night to jog your memory. He pulled a knife from his jacket, and Aaliyah's world narrowed to that gleaming blade. The sound of a car engine made them both freeze. A single set of headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the hangar entrance. A black sedan, the same one Aaliyah had hidden in weeks ago, rolled to a stop. The engine died. The driver's door opened. Jin Young stepped out, hands raised, empty. You actually came, Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls. And unarmed. I'm almost touched. Let her go. Jin Young's voice was calm, but Aaliyah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked every movement. This is between us.
No.
Marcus pressed the knife against Aaliyah's throat. Not hard enough to cut, but enough to make her freeze. This is about what you took from me. My territory. My respect. My woman. She was never yours. She was mine first. Marcus's voice cracked with rage. Before you and your money and your pretty words. She was mine, and I'm taking her back. Jin Young took a slow step forward. That's not going to happen. One more step and I open her throat. Jin Young stopped. His eyes met Aaliyah's across the space between them, and something passed between them. A signal. A reminder. She felt it like electricity through her veins. Strike the throat. That's what he taught her during those quiet afternoons in the penthouse, when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Self-defense, he called it. Survival, more accurately. He'd shown her the soft spots, the vulnerable places where even a weak strike could disable someone. The throat, the eyes, the groin. Aaliyah's hands were bound, but her head was free. Marcus was focused on Jin Young, distracted by his rage and his victory. The knife was at her throat, but his grip was loose. Confident. Arrogant. She remembered what Jin Young had said. Power isn't about what you feel. It's about what others see. So she stopped trying to be small. She stopped trying to survive. She chose to fight. Aaliyah slammed her head backward with everything she had. The back of her skull connected with Marcus's nose. She felt the crunch, heard his howl of pain. The knife clattered to the concrete. She drove her elbow into his solar plexus, then kicked back, catching his knee. Marcus stumbled, blood pouring from his broken nose. Jin Young moved like lightning. His hand went to his ankle, pulling a gun that had been strapped there the whole time. Not unarmed, just patient. The first shot caught Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second shot went wide as Marcus lunged behind a container. Then the shipyard exploded into chaos. More men poured from the shadows. Marcus's crew, the Vipers, hired guns who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Jin Young took cover behind the sedan, returning fire with brutal efficiency. Aaliyah was still zip-tied to the beam, but her hands were in front of her now. She spotted the knife Marcus had dropped and stretched, her fingers just barely reaching it. The plastic gave way with a snap. She was free. Aaliyah! Jin Young's voice cut through the gunfire. Stay down. But she didn't stay down. She ran toward him, staying low, zigzagging between containers. A bullet sparked off metal inches from her head. Another shattered a window. She dove behind the sedan just as Jin Young emptied his clip into an advancing gunman. "You need to leave," he said, ejecting the empty magazine. "There's too many of them." "I'm not leaving you." Aaliyah grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "You taught me not to hide. So I'm not hiding. We fight together or we die together." Something fierce and proud blazed in his eyes. "Then stay behind me." They moved as one. Jin Young had a spare gun in the glove compartment, and he pressed it into her hands, showing her the safety, the trigger, the stance. "Aim center mass. Don't think. Just shoot." The next 5 minutes were a blur of violence and survival. Aaliyah fired the gun, the recoil jarring her arms. She hit someone she saw him fall, and felt nothing but grim satisfaction. This was what Marcus had made her. This was what Jin Young had refined. Not a victim, not prey, a survivor who fought back. Marcus appeared from behind a container, his face a mask of blood and rage. He had a gun now, and it was pointed at Jin Young's back. Aaliyah didn't hesitate. She fired. The bullet caught Marcus in the chest, and he staggered backward, his own shot going wild. He looked at her with something like disbelief. Like he couldn't comprehend that the woman he'd broken could be the one to end him. "You were wrong," Aaliyah said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I was never yours." Marcus collapsed, and the remaining vipers scattered like roaches when the lights came on. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Jin Young's people, no doubt, bought and paid for. The shipyard fell silent, except for the sound of Aaliyah's ragged breathing. Jin Young lowered his gun and turned to face her. His suit was torn, blood staining the white shirt underneath. But he was alive. They both were. "You should have run," he said, but there was no anger in his voice. Only something raw and honest. "I told you. I'm tired of running." Jin Young closed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. Not gently, not carefully, but like she was the only solid thing in a world that had tried to tear them apart. "I need to tell you something," he said into her hair. "I have resources. Money. Connections. I can get you on a plane tonight. Anywhere in the world. New identity. New life. Somewhere he can never find you. Somewhere I can never find you." Aaliyah pulled back just enough to look at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you deserve a choice." Jin Young reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, plane ticket, passport, everything she'd need. "I can give you freedom. Or..." He didn't finish.
He didn't need to.
Aaliyah took the envelope, felt its weight, thought about all the places she could go, all the ways she could reinvent herself. A clean slate, a fresh start. Then she tore it in half. "I already made my choice," she said. "The night I got in your car." Jin Young's expression shattered and rebuilt itself in the span of a heartbeat. He cupped her face in both hands, his bandaged palm gentle against her cheek. "You understand what you're choosing? My world isn't safe. It isn't clean. It will ask things of you that..." "I know." Aaliyah covered his hands with hers. "And I'm choosing it anyway. I'm choosing you." He kissed her then, and this time it wasn't for show. It wasn't strategy or territory or war. It was simply 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided not to let go. When they finally broke apart, Jin Young led her back to the black sedan. The same car where this had all started. But when he opened the door for her, it wasn't as a stranger or a savior or even a protector. It was as an equal. Aaliyah slid into the back seat, and this time, she didn't press herself against the door. She didn't make herself small. When Jin Young climbed in beside her, she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. Outside, the shipyard was already being cleaned. Inside, for the first time in years, Aaliyah felt safe. Not because someone had rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself and chosen to stay. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. I love you all.